The crystal chandeliers of Stellaris cast golden shadows across William Blackwood's sharp jawline as he leaned back in his leather chair, savoring the moment. At 52, he commanded respect in every room he entered. 6'2" of pure confidence wrapped in a custom Brioni suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. His steel gray eyes surveyed the restaurant's elite clientele with practiced indifference. The subtle touch of silver at his temples only enhanced his distinguished appearance, giving him the gravitas that 27 years in corporate America had earned him. As CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, William had transformed a struggling family business into a technology empire worth billions. Gentlemen, William addressed his potential investors in fluent German, his voice carrying that unmistakable authority that had built his empire from nothing. Das Geschäft wird sehr profitabel sein. The business will be very profitable. His guests, two elderly German businessmen, worth collectively over $3 billion, nodded approvingly. William knew exactly how to play this game. Speaking their language wasn't just courtesy, it was power. It showed preparation, respect, and most importantly, control. The fate of Blackwood Enterprises hung in the balance of this dinner. With only 72 hours remaining before the Shanghai deal deadline, William needed these investors on board. Failure wasn't an option, not when his family legacy was at stake. The waitress approached their table with practiced grace, her auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Green eyes focused professionally on her notepad. William barely glanced at her. Service staff were invisible to him, part of the restaurant's ambiance like the expensive art on the walls. "Ik hätte gerne das ribeye steak medium rare mit Trüffelsauce," he said smoothly, not bothering to look up from his phone, where he was checking stock prices. "I'd like the ribeye steak medium rare with truffle sauce." What happened next shattered his perfectly controlled world. The waitress didn't fumble for a translation app or look confused. Instead, she calmly wrote something on a piece of paper, folded it once, and placed it discreetly beside his water glass. Her movements were so smooth, so practiced, that neither of his guests noticed. William's fingers found the note almost involuntarily. His eyes never left his phone screen, maintaining his facade of disinterested authority, but every nerve in his body was suddenly alert. The paper felt expensive between his fingers, not the cheap notepad paper he had expected. He unfolded it carefully, keeping it below the table. "You're being filmed. The man with the blue tie 2 tables away. Be careful." William's blood turned to ice. His eyes flicked up to meet the waitress's for the first time, and what he saw there knocked the breath from his lungs. Intelligence. Sharp, calculating intelligence that had nothing to do with taking dinner orders. And something else, a warning, genuine concern that made no sense coming from a complete stranger. "Das ist interessant." He managed his voice steady as he addressed his guests about the wine selection while his mind raced. "That is interesting." Without making it obvious, he glanced toward the table she'd indicated. There, a lean man in his 40s with a blue silk tie holding his phone at just the right angle. William's stomach dropped. He recognized the setup. Industrial espionage. Someone was recording their conversation, probably hoping to get details about his latest acquisition before tomorrow's announcement. The waitress moved to take his guests' orders, her demeanor perfectly professional, but William caught the subtle way she positioned herself to block the phone's angle. She was protecting him. "But why are bestellen mein Herr?" she asked his first guest. Her German accent, flawless but somehow different. Not native but educated, refined in a way that made William's business instincts scream questions. "Your order, sir?" As she worked her way around the table, William studied her with the same intensity he applied to merger negotiations. Her hands no calluses from washing dishes. Nails too well maintained for someone working doubles in restaurant service. Her posture straight, confident, like someone accustomed to being in charge. And her German, there was something aristocratic about her pronunciation, something that reminded him of his university professors who'd studied in Vienna. "Who was this woman?" "Danke schön," she said softly as she finished taking orders, but she lingered just long enough to catch his eye again. There was a story there hidden behind professional courtesy, and William Blackwood had built his fortune on reading people. "Thank you very much." "Excuse me, gentlemen," he said to his guests, switching back to English. "I need to make a quick call." He stood, note still clutched in his palm, and walked toward the restaurant's private corridor as if heading to the restroom. But instead, he waited in the shadows, watching the mysterious waitress work her section. She moved like a dancer with economy and grace that spoke of expensive training. When she thought no one was looking, her professional smile dropped, replaced by something harder, more guarded. She was running from something or someone. William was certain of it. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, his head of security. Intercepted attempt to bug your table tonight. We've handled it. William's pulse quickened. After the attempted hostile takeover of Blackwood Enterprises 3 years ago, he'd hired Marcus and an elite security team to protect both his personal and business interests. The decision had proven an invaluable time and again, but never more so than tonight. The woman had been right about the surveillance, but how had she known, and more importantly, why had she warned him? He returned to his table where his guests were deep in discussion about market projections. The ribeye arrived perfectly cooked, presented with the truffle sauce he'd requested, but William barely tasted it. His attention was completely focused on the enigmatic waitress who just saved him from a corporate disaster. When she returned to refill their water glasses, he caught her wrist gently. "Excuse me," he said quietly in English, pitched low enough that his guest couldn't hear. "I wanted to thank you for the recommendation." Her green eyes met his directly for the first time, and William felt something shift in his chest. Beautiful didn't begin to cover it. There was depth there, intelligence and pain, carefully hidden behind professional politeness. "Just doing my job, sir," she replied, but her slight smile suggested otherwise. "I'm William," he said, still holding her wrist. Her skin was warm, soft, but he could feel a small scar along her palm. Another mystery. "Claire," she said simply, gently pulling free. "Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Blackwood." She knew his name. She'd known who he was from the moment she'd approached the table. William watched her walk away, his mind spinning with possibilities. In 52 years, no one had ever surprised him like this. No one had ever protected him without wanting something in return. As his guests discussed investment terms, William found himself stealing glances across the dining room. Claire moved through her section with practiced efficiency, but he caught moments the way she automatically straightened a crooked picture frame, the subtle correction of a younger server's posture, the instant recognition of a wine vintage when asked by another customer. This was no ordinary waitress. "William," one of his guests prompted, "your thoughts on the European expansion?" "Right." William refocused, but part of his mind remained on Claire. "I believe we're looking at unprecedented growth opportunities." As the evening wound down and his guests prepared to leave, William made a decision that would change everything. Instead of his usual practice of leaving business dinners immediately after handshakes were exchanged, he lingered. "I'll catch up with you tomorrow," he told his driver through text, "taking care of something here." Claire was clearing tables in her section when he approached. Up close, he noticed more details that didn't fit her job description. A slight tan line where an expensive watch had been a faint scar on her temple that looked surgical, and the way she held herself like someone accustomed to boardrooms rather than dining rooms. "We're closed to new diners," she said without looking up. "I'm not here for dinner," William replied. "I'm here for answers." Claire straightened slowly, weariness replacing her professional demeanor. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Blackwood." "You saved me from corporate espionage tonight. You speak German like you were educated in Austria, and you carry yourself like you've run companies rather than served them." William stepped closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "So I'll ask again. Who are you really, Claire?" For a long moment they stared at each other across the empty dining room. The last customers had left. The other servers had finished their closing duties, and William could hear his own heartbeat in the sudden silence. Claire's carefully constructed mask finally cracked. "Someone who learned the hard way that powerful men can't be trusted," she said quietly, her accent slipping, slightly revealing something more refined, more educated, "and someone who's trying very hard to stay invisible." "From who?" William asked, every protective instinct he didn't know he possessed suddenly firing. Claire looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could afford. "From people who would do anything to make sure I never reclaim what was stolen from me." William Blackwood had built his empire on reading people, but Claire was an enigma that challenged everything he thought he knew about human nature. He arrived at Stellaris the next evening, despite having no business meeting scheduled, telling himself he was simply ensuring his security team had properly handled the surveillance threat. It was a lie, and he knew it. Claire was training a new server when he entered, her patient explanations revealing an expertise that had nothing to do with restaurant work. The 2018 Chassagne Montrachet should be served at exactly 55 degrees, she was saying to a nervous-looking young man. If a customer questions the vintage, explain that this particular vineyard had an exceptional harvest year due to late-season rains in Burgundy. William slipped into a corner booth fascinated. Claire's knowledge of wine was encyclopedic, her manner authoritative but kind. She moved through the restaurant like she owned it, solving problems with quiet efficiency that spoke of natural leadership. "Mr. Blackwood," she said when she finally noticed him, her professional mask sliding back into place. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "Your German pronunciation," he said without preamble. "It's Viennese, upper-class old money." Claire's composure flickered for just a moment, long enough for William to catch a flash of something that might have been panic. "I studied abroad," she said carefully. "Where beta?" William leaned forward, his business instincts fully engaged. "Because I spent 2 years in Vienna for my MBA, and I recognize the accent." He paused, watching her reaction. "It's not learned, Claire. It's native." She glanced around the dining room, noting which tables were occupied, calculating how private their conversation could be. The gesture was automatic, practiced the behavior of someone who'd been hunted. "You're very observant for a customer," she said finally. "You're very evasive for a waitress." William countered, then softened his tone. "Look, I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable, but yesterday you saved me from what could have been a catastrophic security breach. I owe you." Claire's laugh was bitter, surprising him. "Trust me, Mr. Blackwood, you don't owe me anything. In fact, you'd probably be better off forgetting we ever met." "Why?" William asked. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Claire stared at him for a long moment, and William saw her making a decision that went against every instinct she'd developed. "The kind of trouble that destroys everything it touches," she said quietly. "The kind that follows you across oceans and through new identities until there's nowhere left to run." William felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What happened to you?" Before Claire could answer, the restaurant's manager approached their table. "Claire, table 6 is asking about wine pairings for the seafood menu." He set his tone, carrying just enough authority to remind everyone present of the hierarchy. "Of course, Mr. Davidson," Claire replied smoothly. But William caught the way her jaw tightened. "I'll be right there." She started to move away, but William caught her hand. "When do you get off work?" he asked. "Mr. Blackwood." "William," he corrected. "And it's not what you think. I want to help." Claire's green eyes searched his face, looking for deception, for hidden motives. William had the unsettling feeling that she was far better at reading people than he'd initially realized. "Why?" she asked finally. It was a fair question, and William found himself without his usual quick answer. Why was he pursuing this? He had everything: money, power, respect. His life was perfectly ordered, completely under his control. Claire represented chaos, uncertainty, the possibility of complications he didn't need. "Because yesterday you trusted me enough to warn me about danger," he said. "Maybe it's time someone returned the favor." Claire studied him for another heartbeat, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "I finish at 11, she said. "There's a coffee shop on 2nd Street called Midnight Grounds. It's quiet." William smiled, surprised by the relief that flooded through him. "I'll be there." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of routine meetings and conference calls, but William found his attention constantly drifting to the clock. At 10:45, he was sitting in Midnight Grounds, a hole-in-the-wall coffee shop that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s, perfect for a private conversation. Claire arrived at 11:15, having changed from her server uniform into jeans and a simple sweater that somehow made her look younger and more vulnerable. She'd let her hair down, and William realized she was even more beautiful than he'd initially thought. "Thank you for waiting," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Thank you for coming," William replied, signaling the waitress for 2 coffees. "I wasn't sure you would." Claire wrapped her hands around her mug when it arrived, as if seeking warmth. "I almost didn't. This goes against every survival instinct I've developed over the past 2 years." 2 years, William repeated. "Is that how long you've been running?" Claire's smile was sad. "Running implies I have somewhere to go. I've been hiding." "From who?" William leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. Claire was quiet for so long that William began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "From my former fiancé, from his family, from people who would kill to make sure certain truths never come to light. William felt ice form in his veins. Kill. You asked who I really am, Claire said, meeting his eyes directly. My name is Katherine Hartwell. 3 years ago, I was the heir to a textile empire worth $800 million. I had a PhD in international business from Oxford, spoke 6 languages, and was engaged to marry the son of one of America's most prominent banking families. William's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Hartwell. I know the name. Old New England money with business interests spanning 3 continents. But the company had collapsed amid scandal. The embezzlement charges, he said slowly, pieces clicking into place. Katherine nodded, pain flickering across her features. $50 million supposedly transferred to offshore accounts in my name, except I never saw a penny of it. My fiancé, Richard Donovan, had been systematically looting the company for months. When the board discovered the theft, he made sure all evidence pointed to me. Your own fiancé framed you. William's voice carried disbelief and growing anger. Brilliantly, Katherine said bitterly. He had access to my passwords, my signatures, my private accounts. By the time I realized what was happening, I was facing 20 years in prison for crimes I didn't commit. William's hands clenched into fists. The story was horrific enough, but the casual way Katherine described it, as if she'd accepted the betrayal as inevitable, made him furious. How did you escape? He asked. My grandmother, Katherine said, her voice softening slightly. She never believed I was guilty. She liquidated her personal assets and bought me just enough time to disappear before the arrest warrant was executed. New identity, new passport, new life. Her expression hardened. And Richard married his backup plan, my younger cousin Rebecca, 6 months later. The family welcomed him with open arms, grateful he'd saved them from my supposed treachery. Last I heard, he was running for the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston on a platform of financial reform and ethics. William stared at her, his mind reeling. The woman sitting across from him, this intelligent, dignified woman serving tables to survive, had once commanded boardrooms in international negotiations. The injustice of it made his chest tight with rage. You mentioned your German accent, William said. How does that fit into your Boston background? Katherine's smile held a touch of nostalgia. My mother was Austrian, Viennese nobility with no money. She met my father at a charity gala in New York. I spent every summer until I was 18 at my grandparents' estate outside Vienna. German was our home language even in Boston. William nodded, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Katherine, he said carefully, there has to be evidence. Financial records, security footage, something that could prove your innocence. I spent 18 months trying to find it, Katherine replied. Richard was thorough. Every trail leads back to me. Every witness has either disappeared or changed their story. Even if I could prove my innocence, I'd have to surface to do it. And the moment I show my face in Boston, they'd kill you, William finished. Katherine nodded. Richard's family has connections everywhere. Government, law enforcement, international finance. I'm not just a fugitive, William. I'm a loose end that threatens their entire operation. William leaned back, processing everything she told him. Katherine Hartwell, brilliant, educated, betrayed in the worst possible way by someone she trusted with her heart. No wonder she'd warned him about the surveillance. She knew firsthand how dangerous powerful men could be. Why did you tell me this? He asked finally. Katherine was quiet for a moment, studying his face. Because yesterday you proved you're different. Most men in your position would have ignored my warning, assumed I was overstepping my place. But you listened. You acted. She hesitated. And I'm tired of being alone. Something shifted in William's chest, a protective instinct so strong it surprised him. This woman had lost everything, yet she'd still risked exposure to help a stranger. She was extraordinary, and she'd been surviving on her own for 2 years. You're not alone anymore, he said quietly. Katherine's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. William, you don't understand what you're offering. Being associated with me is dangerous. If Richard's people discover you know who I am, let me worry about Richard's people. William interrupted, his voice carrying the steel that had built his empire. I didn't become a billionaire by backing away from fights. For the first time since she'd started her story, Katherine smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. You really don't know what you're getting into. William reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Then I guess you'll have to teach me. The touch sent electricity through both of them, and William saw Catherine's breath catch. The attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface suddenly blazed to life, complicated by everything they'd just shared. "William," Catherine whispered, but she didn't pull her hand away. "I know," he said softly. "This is complicated, dangerous. Probably the worst idea either of us has ever had." "Definitely the worst idea," William agreed. But she turned her palm up to intertwine their fingers. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the magnitude of what had just shifted between them. William had never met anyone like Catherine, strong enough to survive betrayal and exile, smart enough to reinvent herself, completely brave enough to risk everything to help someone else. And Catherine was looking at William like he might actually be exactly what she'd given up hoping for. "So what happens now?" she asked. William smiled, feeling more alive than he had in years. "Now we figure out how to get your life back." The next morning, William woke to a call from Marcus, his head of security. The news wasn't good. The surveillance attempt at Stellaris had been more sophisticated than they had initially thought, part of a larger operation targeting Blackwood Enterprises. "Someone's very interested in the Shanghai deal," Marcus reported. "They've tried to penetrate our systems 3 times in the last week." William's thoughts immediately went to Catherine. Had her involvement with him already put her in danger? Or was this simply normal corporate espionage? As he dressed in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, William paused by the antique desk that had belonged to his father. On it sat the old pocket watch his father had carried every day of his working life, a simple gold timepiece, inscribed with the family motto, "Honor before fortune." How long had it been since he'd truly lived by those words? William had built Blackwood Enterprises into a giant, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of what his father had valued most. His phone rang. It was Michael, his son. William stared at the screen, his heart pounding. 5 years had passed since they'd last spoken, 5 years of birthdays and Christmases marked only by formal gifts and cards. The divorce from Michael's mother had been ugly, and in the aftermath, Michael had chosen sides. William answered, his voice carefully neutral. "Michael." "Dad." The single word carried a weight of unresolved emotions. "I saw on the news about the Shanghai deal. Thought I should call." "I appreciate that," William said, fighting to keep his voice steady. Was this the opening he'd been waiting for? "It's good to hear from you." "Yeah, well," Michael trailed off. "Just wanted to say good cook. Mom said it's a big one." Even Eliza was keeping tabs on his business. "That was unexpected." "The biggest in company history," William admitted. "Would you like to hear about it?" There was a long pause. "Maybe another time. I've got class. Just wanted to check in." "Of course," William said, trying to hide his disappointment. "Thanks for calling, Michael. It really means a lot." After they hung up, William stood at the window looking out over the city he'd conquered. His empire stretched across continents, yet he couldn't bridge the gap with his own son. Perhaps it was time to fix more than just Catherine's problems. That evening, William returned to Stellaris. This time, Catherine was expecting him. She looked exhausted, the strain of her double life evident in the shadows under her eyes. "I can't keep meeting you here," she said as soon as she approached his table. "People are starting to notice." "That's why I came to make you an offer," William replied. "Join me for dinner at my place tomorrow night. I have something important to show you." Catherine glanced around nervously. "William, I told you what's at stake." "I know exactly what's at stake," he said. "That's why you need to see what I've found." She studied him, weighing risk against hope. "What time?" 8 o'clock. I'll send a car." As William left the restaurant, he felt a strange sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Helping Catherine wasn't just about attraction, though. He couldn't deny the pull between them. It was about something his father had tried to teach him long ago, something he'd forgotten in his rise to power. Time and money could be rebuilt, Catherine, but time and honor once lost can never be recovered. 20 years ago, William had learned that lesson the hard way when his first business partner had betrayed him, nearly destroying everything. That betrayal had cost him his marriage, strained his relationship with Michael, and forced him to rebuild from the ashes. Perhaps in helping Catherine reclaim her life, William could begin to reclaim parts of himself he'd left behind. The next evening, Catherine arrived at his Pennant house precisely at 8. She wore a simple black dress that had somehow survived her hasty escape from Boston. The moment she stepped into his home, William saw her eyes cataloging everything, a habit born of survival. Your apartment is exactly what I expected, she said, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the rare art pieces, the carefully curated furniture. And what's that? William asked, pouring her a glass of wine, a Chateau Margaux that cost more than most people earned in a month. Impressive. Expensive. Her eyes fell on the chessboard with a half-finished game. And surprisingly personal. William smiled, pleased. She'd noticed the small touches that made this more than just a showcase for wealth. My father taught me to play chess when I was 5. I still play against myself sometimes when I need to think. And what are you thinking about now? Katherine asked, accepting the wine with a grateful nod. How to help you reclaim what's yours? William said, his expression growing serious. He moved to his desk and opened a laptop, typing in what appeared to be multiple security passwords. I hope you won't be angry, but I had my security team do some discreet investigating into your case. Catherine's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. William, no. I told you how dangerous. Nothing that could be traced back to you, he said quickly. But Katherine, what they found, you need to see this. He turned the laptop screen toward her, and Catherine's breath caught. Financial records filled the screen. Account transfers, transaction logs, digital signatures. But these weren't the doctored documents that had destroyed her life. These were raw bank records, the kind that were supposed to be impossible to access. How did you get these? She whispered. William sat beside her close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken despite everything. Let's just say I have resources Richard never anticipated, he said. Look at transaction 47B. Katherine leaned forward, her financial training taking over. The transfer was dated 6 months before she'd been accused of embezzlement, a test transaction for $50,000 moving money from the Hartwell company account to an offshore shell company. That's not my signature, she breathed. The encryption is completely different. Exactly. William said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Richard had been practicing forging your digital authorization for months. This was his trial run. Catherine's hands shook as she scrolled through more documents. Transaction after transaction, all bearing Richard's crude attempts to replicate her signature style. To a casual observer, they might have looked authentic, but Katherine knew her own security protocols better than anyone. He got sloppy, she said, her voice growing stronger as she spotted more inconsistencies. Look, transaction 52C was processed at 3:47 a.m. Boston time. I was in London that week for the trade summit. There are hotel records security footage, William confirmed. You gave 3 speeches that day, had dinner with the British trade minister, and your key card shows you were in your hotel room by midnight. Physically impossible for you to have authorized that transfer. Katherine stared at the screen, years of helpless rage crystallizing into something sharper, more focused. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she had real evidence proof that could exonerate her and expose Richard for what he really was. Why? She whispered, turning to face William. Why would you risk this for me? William's gray eyes met hers directly, and Katherine saw something there that made her breath catch. Not pity, not charity, but something deeper and more dangerous. Because what happened to you was wrong, he said simply, and because you're extraordinary, Katherine. You deserve justice. The air between them charged with electricity. Katherine was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how William's sleeve was brushing against her bare arm, how his eyes kept dropping to her lips. This evidence, she said, struggling to focus on the laptop screen instead of the way William was looking at her. It's enough to clear my name, but Richard still has too much power in Boston. Even with proof, he could make this disappear before it reaches the right people. Then we make sure it reaches everyone, William said. Simultaneously, every major financial publication, law enforcement agency, and regulatory body in the country. Make it impossible to suppress. Katherine laughed, a sound caught between hope and hysteria. You make it sound so simple. Money makes a lot of things simple, William replied. Then his expression grew more serious. But Katherine, once we do this, there's no going back. Richard will know exactly who helped you. My company will become a target. Katherine stood up abruptly, pacing to the windows that overlooked the glittering city. William was offering her everything she dreamed of: vindication, justice, the chance to reclaim her stolen life. But the cost. I can't ask you to do that, she said without turning around. You've already risked too much. She heard William move behind her, felt his presence even before his hands settled gently on her shoulders. And you're not asking, he said quietly. I'm offering. Katherine turned in his arms, and suddenly they were standing closer than propriety allowed, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, feel the warmth radiating from his skin. William, she whispered, but she didn't step away. I know, he said, his voice rough. This is complicated. You're running from people who want to destroy you. I'm offering to wage war against international criminals, and we barely know each other. We barely know each other, Katherine repeated. But her hands had somehow found their way to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his expensive shirt. Tell me to stop, William said, his head lowering toward hers. Tell me this is a terrible idea, and I'll drive you home right now. Katherine looked up at him, this impossible man who'd appeared in her life like something from a fairy tale, wealthy enough to buy justice, powerful enough to take on her enemies, and somehow convinced she was worth the risk. It is a terrible idea, she whispered. Absolutely catastrophic. William agreed, his lips now inches from hers. We could both lose everything. Everything, he confirmed, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. William. Instead of finishing her sentence, Katherine rose up on her toes and kissed him. The moment their lips met, 2 years of careful control shattered like glass. William's arms came around her, pulling her against him, and Katherine felt herself drowning in sensations she'd forgotten existed. He kissed like he conducted business with complete focus in devastating effectiveness. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Well, William said, his voice rough with desire. That was unexpected. Katherine laughed, surprising herself. Which part? The kissing, or the fact that I'm considering letting you destroy an international crime syndicate on my behalf? Both, William replied, then grew serious. Katherine, I need you to understand. If we do this, if we expose Richard, there's no guarantee your old life will be there waiting for you. Your company is gone. Your family chose his side, your social circles. I know, Katherine said softly, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's time for a completely new life. William's smile was slow and devastating. Are you sure? Because once we start this war, the only way out is victory. Katherine thought about everything she'd lost: her fortune, her reputation, her trust and love. Then she looked at William, this impossible man who'd walked into her life and offered her hope when she'd given up believing in it. Then we'd better make sure we win, she said. William's answering grin was pure predatory satisfaction. Oh, we're going to win. Richard Donovan has no idea what's coming for him. As if on cue, William's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. He glanced at it, and his expression grew grim. What is it? Katherine asked, sudden fear replacing the warmth she'd been feeling. William showed her the screen. The message was simple. She's been found. Recommend immediate relocation. Marcus. Katherine's blood turned to ice. After 2 years of careful hiding, Richard's people had finally tracked her down. Her safe, anonymous life was over. How long do we have? She asked, her survival instincts kicking in. Not long, William replied, but his voice carried steel determination instead of fear. Pack whatever you can't replace. You're staying with me until this is finished. Katherine stared at him, this man who was offering to turn his entire life upside down for someone he'd known for less than a week. You're insane, she said. Probably, William agreed, but I'm also completely sure that losing you now would be the biggest mistake of my life. Outside, the city glittered with millions of lights, each one representing someone living their safe, predictable existence. But inside William Blackwood's penthouse, 2 people were about to embark on the most dangerous gamble of their lives, for justice, for truth, and for a love that had bloomed in the shadows of international conspiracy. The war for Katherine's freedom was about to begin. The safe house William had arranged was a fortress disguised as a luxury hotel suite in Midtown Manhattan. 24-hour security, bulletproof glass, and enough surveillance equipment to make the FBI jealous. But as Katherine stood at the window watching the street below, she felt more trapped than protected. 3 days had passed since Richard's people had found her, and the weight of dragging William into her nightmare was crushing her spirit. She'd watched him transform from successful CEO to hunted man, fielding increasingly aggressive calls from business partners demanding explanations for his sudden security measures. The Shanghai deal is falling apart, William said, ending another tense phone call. My investors think I've lost my mind moving the company into what they're calling fortress mode without explanation. Katherine turned from the window, guilt eating at her like acid. William had lost $15 million in canceled contracts over the past 72 hours, all because he'd decided to protect her. This was a mistake, she said quietly. I should go tonight, disappear again before you lose everything. William's expression hardened. We've been through this, Katherine. I'm not letting you face this alone. Look around, William. Katherine gestured at the heavily secured room. This isn't living. This is a prison. And for what a woman you've known for 2 weeks. The words hit their target. William's jaw tightened, and Katherine saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt maybe, or the first crack in his resolve. Don't, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Don't reduce what we have to a timeline. What do we have? Katherine challenged, her voice rising. A few stolen kisses, some late-night conversations. You're destroying your life for someone who's brought you nothing but danger. William stared at her for a long moment, and Katherine saw the exact moment her words found their mark. The certainty in his eyes wavered, replaced by the cold calculation that had built his empire. Maybe you're right, he said finally. Maybe I have been thinking with something other than my brain. The words hit Katherine like physical blows, even though she'd been trying to provoke exactly this reaction. She wanted him to walk away to save himself before Richard destroyed him too. But hearing him actually question their connection felt like dying. Before either of them could say anything else, William's secure phone rang. He answered it with sharp efficiency that reminded Katherine of the arrogant CEO she'd first met. Blackwood. Katherine watched his face change as he listened, saw the blood drain from his cheeks. When? He asked tersely. How bad? More listening. Then William's hand clenched into a fist. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and turned to Katherine, his expression grim. There's been an incident at my headquarters. Security breach. Files stolen. 2 employees hospitalized. His voice was completely flat, devoid of emotion. Richard's people just escalated. Katherine felt her world collapse. This was exactly what she'd feared, what she'd tried to prevent by pushing William away. Richard wasn't just hunting her anymore. He was systematically destroying everyone who tried to help her. William, I'm so sorry. Don't, he interrupted, his voice like ice. Just don't, I need to handle this. I need to. He was already moving toward the door, grabbing his jacket and car keys. Katherine watched him prepare to leave, saw him rebuilding the walls she'd spent 2 weeks helping him tear down. What about us? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. William paused at the door, his hand on the handle. When he turned back to her, his expression was the same one he wore in boardrooms, professional, distant, untouchable. There is no us, Katherine. There's just a businessman who made a series of increasingly poor decisions and a woman who needs to find a different way to solve her problems. The door closed behind him with devastating finality. Katherine stood alone in the safe house, surrounded by luxury that felt like a mockery. She'd gotten what she wanted. William was walking away, protecting himself from her toxic situation. So why did victory feel like the worst kind of defeat? Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Miss me, darling. Time to come home. R. Richard had found her again, but this time she had no protector, no hope, no one willing to stand with her against the monster who had stolen her life. Katherine packed her single suitcase with mechanical precision. She'd run before. She could run again. Maybe this time she'd find a place far enough away that Richard would eventually lose interest. Maybe she'd learn to stop hoping for rescue, stop believing in fairy tales about powerful men who actually cared about justice. As she prepared to disappear back into anonymity, Katherine allowed herself one last look around the suite, where she'd briefly believed in love again. William's coffee mug still sat on the side table, his chess game half finished on the board. Evidence of a life she'd been foolish enough to think she might share. She was reaching for the door handle when it opened from the outside. Marcus Williams, head of security, entered with 3 other men in expensive suits. Katherine's blood ran cold. Had William sent them to ensure she left quietly? Or worse, had Richard's people somehow infiltrated William's team? Dr. Hartwell, Marcus said formally, please step away from the door. Katherine's heart pounded as she calculated her chances of escape. 0, she realized. These men were professionals, and she was trapped in a room 20 floors above the street. I was just leaving, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. No, Marcus replied. You're coming with us. Mr. Blackwood's orders. Catherine's confusion must have shown on her face because Marcus's professional expression softened slightly. There's something you need to know about what happened at the office today, he said. Something Mr. Blackwood discovered that changes everything. 30 minutes later, Katherine found herself in William's private office, but it looked like a war zone. Computer screens had been shattered, filing cabinets, torn open papers scattered everywhere. And in the center of it all sat William, staring at a single photograph with an expression of pure fury. He looked up when she entered, and Katherine saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not the cold distance from their earlier fight, but something much more dangerous. Richard made a mistake, William said quietly, holding up the photograph. He got sloppy. Katherine moved closer and her heart stopped. The photo showed her entering the safe house 3 days ago, but it wasn't taken from the street. It was taken from inside William's building by someone with access to the executive floors. Someone on my board has been feeding Richard information. William continued, his voice deadly calm. Someone I've trusted for years has been setting us up from the beginning. Katherine stared at the photo, her mind racing. Who? William's smile was purely predatory. Thomas Reynolds, my oldest friend, business partner for 15 years, and apparently Richard's inside man from day one. The betrayal in William's voice was devastating. Katherine understood now why he'd seemed so broken when he left, discovering that his closest friend had betrayed him, had helped orchestrate the attack on his company and his employees. But why? Katherine asked. What possible connection could Thomas have to Richard? William's expression darkened. That's what I intend to find out. Marcus is bringing him in now. Bringing him in willingly. Not exactly. William stood pacing the office like a caged tiger. 20 years ago, Thomas and I started this company together. Then we brought in a third partner, Edward Klein. When the company took off, Edward wanted to push into some questionable areas. Government contracts with ethical gray areas, technologies with military applications. I refused. William paused, the memory clearly painful. Edward tried to force me out. Failed. Then he vanished with millions in company funds. It nearly destroyed us. Thomas stood by me through that crisis, or so I thought. You think Thomas was working with Edward back then too? I'm beginning to wonder if anything about our friendship was ever real. The office door opened and Marcus entered with Thomas Reynolds between two security officers. The man looked nothing like Katherine had expected. In his late 50s, he was slight, scholarly, with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, more professor than villain. William, he said calmly, as if this were a normal business meeting, you are making a terrible mistake. William stood completely still. Am I? Because I have evidence that you've been passing information to Richard Donovan for months. Information about my movements, my security protocols, my personal life. Thomas didn't flinch. I've been doing what's necessary to protect this company. Something you've clearly forgotten how to do since meeting her. He nodded toward Katherine without looking at her. How exactly does corporate espionage protect the company? William's voice was dangerously quiet. Richard Donovan approached me 6 months ago with an offer. He had information about Edward Klein, information that could destroy everything we've built. He threatened to release it unless I cooperated. What information? Katherine asked, unable to remain silent. For the first time, Thomas looked directly at her. That Edward didn't steal that money 20 years ago. William did, and he framed Edward to cover it up. The accusation hung in the air like poison. That's a lie, William said, but Katherine heard the slight tremor in his voice. Thomas smiled thinly. Is it? I've been wondering for 20 years why you were so quick to accuse Edward. Now I know. Richard has proof, William. Documents, testimonies, bank trails that lead straight back to you. William went completely still. So you betrayed me based on the word of a man who framed his own fiancé for embezzlement. I did what was necessary, Thomas repeated, just like I've always done. And the attack on my employees today was that necessary too. Thomas's composure cracked slightly. That wasn't supposed to happen. Richard's people were just supposed to retrieve certain files. No one was meant to get hurt. William stepped closer to Thomas, his expression dangerous. Well, people did get hurt. 2 of my employees are in the hospital, and you're going to help me make this right. Or what? Thomas challenged. Or I release the contents of that safe you've been keeping. William nodded toward a painting on the wall. The one you think I don't know about. The color drained from Thomas's face. You're bluffing. Am I? William strode to the painting and swung it aside, revealing a hidden wall safe. You've been documenting everything, haven't you, Thomas? Every transaction, every communication with Richard, every dirty little secret, your insurance policy. How did you? The same way you learned to hide things from me, I learned to find them. William entered a complex code and the safe opened to reveal a thick file folder and a stack of external hard drives. You're a careful man, Thomas, always covering your tracks, and it's going to be your undoing. Catherine's pulse quickened as William removed the files. What's in there? Everything, William said grimly. Every transaction Richard has made through Thomas, every bribe, every piece of blackmail. A complete map of his criminal network spanning 3 continents. Thomas lunged forward suddenly, but Marcus caught him before he could reach William. You can't use those, Richard will kill us all. Then you shouldn't have kept such detailed records, William replied coldly. Take him to the secure room, he instructed Marcus. We're not done with him yet. As Thomas was led away, still protesting, Katherine approached the table where William had spread out the documents. Is it true, she asked quietly, what he said about you framing Edward? William met her gaze steadily. No, Edward stole that money, but now I understand why Thomas betrayed me. Richard found his weakness, doubt. Thomas always wondered if I was telling the truth about Edward. Richard exploited that doubt. Katherine studied the files, her financial expertise quickly recognizing the magnitude of what they'd found. This is everything, William. Account dates, contacts, Richard's entire operation laid bare. I know, but it won't be easy to use. Richard has judges and prosecutors in his pocket. We'll need to be very careful about how we proceed. What's our next move? William's expression was grim but determined. We prepare for war. Richard just escalated from surveillance to physical attack. We need to strike back before he comes after us directly. Over the next 72 hours, William's penthouse transformed into a command center. Security teams, cyber experts, and legal specialists worked around the clock analyzing Thomas's files and building a case against Richard that not even his connections could dismiss. But it wasn't going smoothly. Twice they thought they'd secured a federal prosecutor willing to take the case, only to have them back out at the last minute. 3 times they nearly had a judge willing to issue warrants, only to watch them suddenly recuse themselves. Richard's influence ran deeper than they'd anticipated. On the 4th day, as Katherine and William were reviewing another failed attempt to get law enforcement involved, Marcus entered with troubling news. Sir, we've lost contact with our team surveilling Richard's Boston office, and there's been unusual activity around our building perimeter. William immediately went on alert. Evacuate non-essential personnel. Initiate lockdown protocol. Already done, Marcus confirmed, but there's something else. We've intercepted communications suggesting Richard is planning something major tonight. Something he calls final correction. Katherine felt her blood run cold. He's coming for us directly. Let him try, William said grimly. This building has more security than most government facilities. But Katherine wasn't reassured. Richard doesn't play by the rules, William. He'll have a contingency for every defense you've put in place. As if to prove her point, the lights in the penthouse suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. The emergency generators kicked in seconds later, but the message was clear: their fortress was vulnerable. We need to move, William decided, now, before he can fully implement whatever he's planning. Within minutes, they were in William's private elevator, heading for the underground garage, where an armored SUV waited. Katherine clutched a secure tablet containing copies of all the evidence they'd compiled. If we can get to the FBI field office in person, William explained, they'll have to listen. We'll bypass Richard's influence in the local system. The elevator doors opened, revealing the dimly lit garage. Marcus led the way, 2 security officers flanking William and Katherine. They had almost reached the vehicle when shots rang out. One of the security officers fell, and Marcus immediately pushed Katherine and William behind a concrete pillar, returning fire. Stay down, he ordered as bullets pinged off concrete around them. William pulled Katherine closer, shielding her with his body. Are you all right? Yes, she gasped, heart pounding, but we're trapped. William's mind raced, analyzing their options. The service tunnel, it connects to the building next door. If we can reach it. More gunfire erupted closer this time. Marcus signaled to the remaining security officer, who provided covering fire as they began moving toward a nondescript door at the far end of the garage. They had almost reached it when Katherine heard William grunt in pain. She turned to see blood spreading across his shirt sleeve. "William, it's nothing," he said through gritted teeth. "Keep moving." They made it through the door and into the dimly lit service tunnel. Marcus secured the door behind them, but it wouldn't hold for long. "We have about 2 minutes," he said grimly. "Can you run?" William nodded, pressing his hand against the wound. "Lead the way." They ran through the narrow tunnel, the sound of pursuit growing behind them. At the end of the tunnel, another door led into the neighboring building's basement. Marcus had it open in seconds, and they emerged into a quiet storage area. "We need to keep moving," William insisted, though his face was pale from blood loss. "They'll check here next." Marcus helped William toward the service elevator while Katherine kept watch. They made it to the street level and out into the busy Manhattan evening. "The FBI office is 15 blocks north," Marcus said, flagging down a taxi. "We'll be too exposed on the street." "We can't risk public transportation," William argued. "They'll have people watching." "What about Rebecca?" Katherine suggested suddenly. "Richard's people won't know about her." William considered this. "Your cousin, the one who married Richard. She's in New York, Fashion Week. She's staying at the plaza." "It's risky," Marcus warned. "Everything is risky now," Katherine replied, "and she might be our only chance." William nodded decisively. "The plaza it is." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Katherine saw black SUVs converging on William's building. Richard had committed fully to his attack, but they'd escaped barely. Now they just needed to convince Rebecca to help them take down the man she'd married. At the plaza, Katherine hung back while Marcus secured the perimeter. If Rebecca was under surveillance, Katherine's presence would trigger immediate alarm. "Room 712, William confirmed after checking with the front desk. "Marcus will go up first to make sure it's safe." Katherine nodded, her nerves frayed to breaking. After everything they'd been through, their fate now rested in the hands of the woman who had replaced her in Richard's life. 10 minutes later, Marcus returned. "She's alone, no signs of surveillance, but she's not happy about the unexpected visitors." "I'll handle it," William said, his injured arm now properly bandaged by the hotel's discreet physician. Katherine took a deep breath as they approached Rebecca's suite. When the door opened, she came face to face with her cousin for the first time in 3 years. Rebecca Donovan was still beautiful, tall and slender, with the same aristocratic features that marked all the women in the Hartwell family. But there was something different about her, a hardness around her eyes, a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Katherine," she whispered, shock evident on her face. "My God." "Hello, Rebecca," Katherine said calmly, though her heart was racing. "May we come in?" Rebecca stepped aside wordlessly, her eyes fixed on Katherine as if seeing a ghost. When the door closed behind them, she found her voice. "You're supposed to be dead." "I'm sure that's what Richard told you," Katherine replied. "He said you committed suicide after the embezzlement was discovered, that you left a note confessing everything." Rebecca's voice shook. "There was a funeral. I mourned you." Katherine felt a surge of unexpected emotion. "You actually cared." "Of course I cared. You were like a sister to me until—" Rebecca trailed off, her eyes dropping to the floor. "Until you married my fiancé," Katherine finished quietly. Rebecca flinched. "I know how it looks, but after your death, Richard was devastated. We comforted each other. One thing led to another." William cleared his throat. "Mrs. Donovan, I'm afraid we don't have time for a complete family reunion. Richard's men tried to kill us less than an hour ago. We need your help." Rebecca seemed to notice William for the first time. "Who are you?" "William Blackwood. I've been helping Katherine clear her name." Rebecca's eyes widened. "The tech billionaire Richard mentioned you. He said you were causing problems for some of his business associates." "I imagine he did," William said dryly. "Those business associates are part of an international criminal network that Richard controls. The same network he used to frame Katherine for embezzlement 3 years ago." Rebecca shook her head. "No, that's not possible. Richard isn't perfect, but he's not a criminal." Katherine stepped forward, her patience worn thin. "Rebecca, we have proof. Bank records, communications, witness statements. Richard stole that money and made it look like I did it. He's been using the Donovan name to launder money for years." "No," Rebecca insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, he would have told me. I would have seen signs." Unless you didn't want to see them, Katherine suggested gently. It's easier not to question when the alternative means admitting you have been living a lie. Rebecca sank onto the nearest chair, her composure cracking. There have been things. Phone calls he wouldn't explain, meetings with people he wouldn't introduce me to, money that appeared in our accounts without clear sources. She looked up at Katherine, desperation in her eyes. But that doesn't make him a criminal. It makes him a businessman with secrets. William approached carefully. Mrs. Donovan, your husband has tried to kill us twice in the last week. Tonight he sent armed men into my building. One of my security team is dead. This isn't about business secrets. This is about a man who will do anything to protect his criminal empire. Katherine knelt beside her cousin, taking her hands. Rebecca, I know this is hard to hear, but I need you to really think. Has Richard been acting differently lately? More agitated, more secretive. Rebecca's resistance was crumbling. He's been obsessed with some project. He calls it final correction. He's been working on it for months, ever since, her eyes widened as realization dawned. Ever since Thomas Reynolds contacted him about you being alive. William and Katherine exchanged glances. What exactly is final correction? William asked. I don't know details, just that it's supposed to solve all his problems at once. Rebecca's voice dropped. He said it would be clean and permanent. Katherine felt ice in her veins. He's planning something big, not just against us. Against anyone who could threaten him, William agreed, including witnesses, associates who know too much. And his wife, Katherine finished, looking at Rebecca. If he's covering his tracks, you're a liability. Rebecca paled. You can't possibly think Richard would hurt me. I didn't think he would frame me for embezzlement, Katherine countered. Yet here we are. William's phone buzzed. He checked the message, his expression grim. Marcus says we need to move. There's unusual activity in the hotel lobby. Rebecca stood abruptly. I need to call Richard. He'll explain everything. Katherine grabbed her arm. If you warn him you're signing our death warrants, maybe your own too. He's my husband. And he was my fiancé, Katherine said sharply. Trust me when I say that means nothing to him. Rebecca hesitated, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. Finally, she nodded. What do you need from me? Access, William said promptly, to Richard's personal files, accounts, communications. Anything that could help us understand what final correction is and how to stop it. And shelter, Katherine added. Somewhere Richard wouldn't think to look for us. Rebecca considered this. I have access to his personal laptop. And we have a lake house in the Adirondacks. It's in my name, only a gift from my father. Richard never goes there. That's a start, William said. How quickly can you get us the laptop? It's here, Rebecca said. In the hotel safe. Richard never travels without it, but he had an emergency meeting tonight. Left it with me for safekeeping. William's eyes lit with predatory satisfaction. Mrs. Donovan, you might have just saved a lot of lives. Within 20 minutes, they had Richard's laptop and were in a car headed north. Rebecca accompanying them reluctantly but determined. Marcus had arranged for additional security to meet them at the lake house. As they drove through the night, William worked on breaking into the laptop's encryption. Katherine watched him, marveling at his focus despite his injury and exhaustion. You should rest, she said softly. Later, he replied without looking up. This is more important. Why did Rebecca ask suddenly from the back seat? Why are you doing this? You barely know Katherine. You've been shot, nearly killed. Your company is under attack. Why risk everything for her? William paused his work, looking up to meet Katherine's eyes. Because some things are worth fighting for, he said simply. Justice, truth, and people who deserve a second chance. The emotion in his voice silenced Rebecca, and they continued the journey in contemplation. At the lake house, William finally cracked the encryption. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Final correction wasn't just an operation against them, it was Richard's contingency plan to eliminate everyone who could testify against him. The list included government officials, he'd bribed business partners who knew too much, even his own employees who had executed illegal orders. He's going to kill them all, Katherine whispered, scrolling through the list of names. Over 30 people. And replace them with loyalists, William added, reviewing the second phase of the plan. It's not just a cleanup, it's a consolidation of power. Rebecca had been reading over their shoulders, her face growing paler by the minute. Richard couldn't do this. He's not a monster. Look at the evidence, Rebecca, Katherine said gently. This is all in his handwriting on his personal laptop. Rebecca turned away, unable to face the truth any longer. But when she spoke, her voice was steadier than Katherine had expected. I want immunity. William looked up sharply. What? If I help you stop this, I want immunity from prosecution. And I want my life back, my family's assets, my reputation, everything. Katherine stared at her cousin, seeing real strength emerge for the first time. You're willing to testify against him. I'm willing to do what's necessary to stop innocent people from being killed, Rebecca clarified, and to make amends for my part in what happened to you, however unwitting it was. William nodded. I can arrange it. I have contacts in the Justice Department who owe me favors. Then let's get to work, Rebecca said decisively. Richard plans to initiate final correction tomorrow night. We don't have much time. 4 hours later, as dawn broke over the Adirondack Mountains, they had a plan. Using the evidence from Thomas's files and Richard's laptop combined with Rebecca's intimate knowledge of her husband's schedule and security, they would execute a coordinated strike against Richard's entire operation. It has to be simultaneous, William explained to the FBI contact he had managed to reach securely. If you move on one part of his network, he'll destroy evidence and disappear with the rest. We'll need warrants for over 20 locations, the agent warned. The evidence we provided is more than sufficient, William countered, and we have a willing insider prepared to testify. The call ended with a tentative agreement, but Katherine wasn't convinced. Will they really move fast enough? Richard has people inside the bureau too. That's why we're not relying solely on the FBI, William said, revealing the second part of his plan. Marcus has teams prepared to secure evidence at key locations the moment the FBI moves. And I've prepared data packages for every major financial publication and news outlet. If law enforcement fails us, public exposure will force their hand. It was a good plan, but like all plans, it didn't survive contact with the enemy. Just after noon, as they were finalizing details, the lake house's perimeter alarms were triggered. We've been found, Marcus announced, checking the security feeds. At least 8 armed men approaching from the North Shore. How? Katherine demanded. No one knew about this place except... All eyes turned to Rebecca, who stood frozen by the window. I didn't tell him, she insisted. I swear. William was already moving, gathering their evidence and equipment. It doesn't matter how. What matters is getting out of here with the evidence intact. Marcus directed his team to defensive positions, while William led Katherine and Rebecca to a hidden dock behind the house where a boat waited. We'll take the lake route, he explained. There's a private airstrip 10 miles south. I have a plane standing by. As they reached the dock, gunfire erupted from the house. Marcus and his men were buying them time, but it wouldn't last long. William started the boat's engine as Katherine and Rebecca climbed aboard. They were just pulling away when a bullet struck the instrument panel, showering them with sparks. Get down, William shouted, pushing both women to the floor as he steered blindly away from shore. More bullets struck the water around them, but they were moving fast quickly, disappearing into the morning mist that still clung to the lake's surface. When they were safely out of range, Katherine sat up to find William grimly piloting the damaged boat. Your arm, she said, noticing fresh blood on his bandage. It's fine, he insisted. We need to focus on getting to that airstrip. Rebecca, huddled in the bow, looked shell-shocked. He found us. He always finds me. What do you mean? Katherine asked. Rebecca pushed up her sleeve, revealing a small scar on her forearm. Wedding gift from Richard. He said it was a microchip for medical emergencies. I always wondered, William swore under his breath. A tracking device. He's been monitoring your movements from the beginning. Katherine felt sick. All this time you've been a prisoner without even knowing it. Rebecca's laugh was hollow. Apparently I've been a lot of things without knowing it. Wife to a criminal. Accomplice. Pawn. Not anymore, Katherine said firmly. Now you're something else, the key to bringing him down. They reached the southern shore, abandoning the bullet-riddled boat and continuing on foot through dense forest. William's contact was waiting at the airstrip with a small private plane. Any word from Marcus? William asked as they boarded. They got out, the pilot confirmed, heading to the secondary rendezvous point now. Relief flooded through Katherine. More lives Richard hadn't managed to take. As the plane took off, she looked at William, noting the tight lines of pain around his mouth, the exhaustion in his eyes. He had sacrificed so much for her cause. His company was under attack, his life in danger. His closest friend had betrayed him, yet he remained steadfast. "We need to end this," she said quietly, "today, before anyone else gets hurt." William nodded. "That's exactly what we're going to do." The plane banked toward New York City, where the final confrontation with Richard Donovan awaited. 2 hours later, they touched down at a small airfield in New Jersey. William's remaining security team met them with fresh vehicles and equipment. "The FBI has agreed to move," William informed them as they drove toward Manhattan. "They're assembling tactical teams now. We have a 4-hour window to get everything in place." Katherine reviewed the plan one last time. Rebecca would contact Richard, claiming she'd been kidnapped and had escaped, luring him to a location where the FBI could apprehend him without risking civilian casualties. Meanwhile, William's teams would secure physical evidence from key locations, and Katherine would coordinate with the federal prosecutors who had finally agreed to take the case. It was dangerous, complex, and relied on perfect timing, and it was their only chance. "Richard won't come alone," Rebecca warned as they prepared her for her role. "He always has security with him." "The FBI is prepared for that," William assured her. "Your job is just to get him to the location. Let them handle the rest." Rebecca nodded, fear and determination warring in her expression. "I want to wear a wire. If something goes wrong, I want there to be a record of whatever he says." Katherine admired her cousin's courage. "Are you sure if he discovers it?" "I'm sure," Rebecca said firmly. "It's time I stopped hiding from the truth." As Rebecca made the call that would set everything in motion, Katherine and William shared a moment of quiet in the operations center they'd established. "We might actually pull this off," Katherine said, allowing herself to hope for the first time in days. William took her hand. "We will. Richard has power and connections, but he's not infallible. He's made mistakes, got sloppy, trusted the wrong people." "So have we," Katherine reminded him, thinking of Thomas. "The difference is we learn from it," William replied. "And we're fighting for something more important than power or money." "What's that?" "A future worth having." The simplicity of his answer touched her deeply. In the midst of international criminal conspiracies and life-or-death struggles, William had not lost sight of what truly mattered. The next few hours passed in a blur of coordinated activity. FBI teams moved into position. William's security forces secured key evidence. Rebecca, wired and prepared, headed to the meeting point, a private dining room at an exclusive Manhattan restaurant where she and Richard often celebrated anniversaries. And then everything went wrong. First came the news that one of the FBI tactical teams had been involved in a suspicious traffic accident, delaying their arrival at a crucial evidence site. Then two of the federal prosecutors abruptly recused themselves, citing conflicts of interest that hadn't existed hours earlier. "Richard's fighting back," William realized. "He must have figured out what we're doing." Katherine's blood ran cold. "Rebecca, if he suspects a trap..." They tried to warn her, but her communication device had gone silent. William immediately diverted his security team to the restaurant, but they were 15 minutes away at best. "We need to go," Katherine said, already moving toward the door. "Now." "It's too dangerous," William protested. "Richard could be setting a trap of his own." "That's my cousin in there," Katherine insisted. "I'm not leaving her to face him alone." William saw the determination in her eyes and nodded. "Then we go together." They arrived at the restaurant to find it eerily quiet. The maitre d' informed them that a private party had reserved the entire establishment for the evening. "Richard's work," Katherine murmured, "eliminating witnesses." They made their way to the private dining room, moving carefully through the deserted restaurant. As they approached, they heard voices. Rebecca and Richard engaged in what sounded like a normal conversation. "She's stalling him," William whispered, "keeping him talking until backup arrives." They paused outside the door, listening. "I don't understand why all the secrecy," Rebecca was saying, her voice remarkably steady. "Why not just tell me about your business concerns? I am your wife, after all." "Some matters are too complex for those without the proper background," Richard replied smoothly. "I've always protected you from the uglier aspects of high finance." "Protected me?" Rebecca's voice took on an edge. "Is that what you call putting a tracking device in my arm?" A dangerous pause. "So you've discovered that. I was wondering why you disabled it this morning." I discovered a lot of things, Richard, including what final correction really means. Another pause longer this time. I see. And how exactly did you come by that information? Does it matter I know what you're planning, the killings, the cover-up, all of it? Richard's laugh was chilling in its casualness. My dear, I think you've been watching too many thriller movies. Business reorganization often requires difficult decisions, but I assure you no one is being killed. Don't lie to me, Rebecca's voice rose. I've seen the files, the lists of names, the detailed plans for disposing of bodies. If you've seen such things, then you're in a very dangerous position. Richard's voice hardened, one that I strongly advise you to reconsider. William tensed beside Katherine. He's threatening her. We need to move. Wait, Katherine whispered. The FBI teams should be in position by now. If we go in too soon. Inside the room, Rebecca was pushing harder. Or what, Richard? You'll add me to your list. Make me disappear like all those other inconvenient people, like you tried to do to Katherine. A chair scraped loudly. Katherine is dead, Richard said flatly. She killed herself when her embezzlement was discovered. No, Richard. Katherine is very much alive, and she has proof of what you did to her, to the company, to all those other victims. You've spoken with her. It wasn't a question. When, recently enough to learn the truth, all of it. I see, honey. Richard's voice had gone dangerously quiet. And I suppose you've been helping her, betraying your husband for a woman who abandoned you years ago. She didn't abandon me, Richard. You made me believe she was dead. For your own protection, Richard insisted. Katherine was unstable, dangerous. She would have destroyed the company, the family legacy, everything. The only thing being destroyed was your criminal operation, Rebecca countered, which ends today. Katherine and William exchanged glances. Rebecca was pushing too hard. Really? Richard's tone shifted to something almost amused. And how exactly do you plan to end it? The FBI has everything, the records from Thomas Reynolds, your laptop files detailing final correction, my testimony. It's over, Richard. A long silence followed. I see, Richard said finally. That is unfortunate, for you especially. The sound of a gun being cocked echoed clearly through the door. William reacted instantly, bursting through the door with Katherine right behind him. The private dining room revealed Richard standing over Rebecca, a pistol pointed at her head. Two bodyguards flanked him, their own weapons already drawn. William Blackwood, Richard said, seemingly unsurprised. And Katherine, what a family reunion. Put the gun down, Richard, William demanded, his voice steady despite the two weapons now trained on him. I don't think I will, Richard replied calmly. You see, I find myself in a rather difficult position. My wife has betrayed me. My operation is compromised. And the woman who should have died 3 years ago continues to be a persistent problem. Katherine stepped forward, drawing Richard's attention. It's me you want, Richard. Let Rebecca go. Richard laughed, the sound chilling in its genuineness. Oh, Katherine, always the noble one. But this isn't just about you anymore. It's about loose ends. And unfortunately, you have all become very loose ends. The FBI is outside, William bluffed. This building is surrounded. You can't kill 3 people and walk away. Can I? Richard challenged. Do you know how many judges I own in this city? How many police captains, district attorneys? Even if the FBI is involved by tomorrow, this will be nothing but a tragic murder-suicide. Unstable Katherine Hartwell back from the dead, killing her cousin out of jealousy, before turning the gun on herself and her lover. He adjusted his grip on the pistol, pressing it harder against Rebecca's temple. A sad end to a sad story. Katherine saw Rebecca's eyes close, tears streaming down her face. You won't get away with this, Katherine said, desperately trying to buy time. Thomas Reynolds kept records of everything. Evidence you can't erase. Thomas Reynolds is no longer a concern, Richard replied smoothly. As we speak, he's having an unfortunate accident in federal custody. Heart failure, I believe. So tragic for a man his age. William tensed. You've reached inside the federal prison system. I've reached everywhere that matters, Richard said with chilling confidence. Now I think we've extended this reunion long enough. He began to squeeze the trigger, but at that exact moment, Rebecca moved. She drove her elbow hard into Richard's stomach, throwing off his aim. The gun fired into the ceiling as she twisted away. Chaos erupted. The bodyguards opened fire as William tackled Katherine to the ground, shielding her with his body. From somewhere outside, more gunshots sounded. The FBI teams had finally arrived. In the confusion, Katherine lost sight of Rebecca. She heard Richard shouting orders, the sounds of struggle, more gunfire. William pulled her behind an overturned table as bullets splintered the wood around them. "Stay down," he ordered, reaching for his own weapon. The firefight was intense but brief. FBI tactical teams stormed the room, overwhelming Richard's bodyguards. When the gunfire ceased, Katherine cautiously raised her head to survey the devastation. Richard was gone. One of his bodyguards lay dead, the other in handcuffs. And Rebecca, Katherine scrambled across the bullet-riddled dining room to where her cousin lay motionless beside an overturned chair. Blood pooled beneath her, spreading across the expensive carpet. Katherine gathered Rebecca in her arms, desperately searching for signs of life. "Get a medic, wow." Rebecca's eyes fluttered open, unfocused with shock. "Katherine," she whispered, "did we get him?" "Don't talk," Katherine urged, applying pressure to the wound in Rebecca's shoulder. "Help is coming." "Richard, he ran." "Service corridor," Rebecca managed before losing consciousness. William was immediately issuing orders to the FBI team. "Seal all exits. He's in the service corridors, armed and dangerous." As paramedics rushed in to tend to Rebecca, William returned to Katherine's side. "She'll be all right," he assured her. "The wound looks worse than it is." "And Richard," William's expression darkened, "still at large, but he won't get far. Every law enforcement agency in the city is looking for him now." But Katherine wasn't so confident. Richard had escaped the FBI's net once already. He had resources, connections, contingency plans. And a desperate man was the most dangerous kind. "We need to end this," she said firmly, "once and for all." As Rebecca was transported to the hospital under armed guard, Katherine and William joined the FBI command center that had been established to coordinate the manhunt for Richard Donovan. "He has safe houses throughout the city," Katherine informed them, drawing on her knowledge of Richard's operations. "Underground garages with getaway vehicles, private helipads, escape routes planned for years." "We're checking them all," the FBI agent in charge assured her. "And we've frozen every account we know about grounded all-private aircraft and put his description out to every transportation hub in a 100-mile radius." But Katherine shook her head. "You don't understand. Richard doesn't think like a normal fugitive. He plans for everything, including this scenario." William, who had been studying a map of the city, looked up suddenly. "The Foundation Gala," he said. "It's tonight at the Metropolitan Museum." "What about it?" the agent asked. "It's the perfect cover," William explained. "Hundreds of wealthy, powerful people. Security focused on protecting the attendees, not catching infiltrators. And it's the last place anyone would expect a fugitive to go." Katherine saw his logic immediately. "Plus there will be media. Richard always had a flair for the dramatic. What better way to go out than in a blaze of publicity?" The agent looked skeptical. "You think he'd risk a public appearance when every cop in the city is looking for him?" "I think Richard would rather die on his own terms than be captured," Katherine said grimly. "And he'd want to take as many people down with him as possible." William was already on his phone issuing orders to increase security at the gala. "We need to evacuate quietly," he told the FBI. "No mass panic. Just get people out, a few at a time." The agent nodded. "I'll coordinate with museum security. But we still don't know for sure he's there." "I do," Katherine said, suddenly staring at her phone. A text had just arrived from an unknown number. "Join me for one last dance, the roof, 9 p.m. Come alone or others will suffer. R." William read the message over her shoulder, his face hardening. "Absolutely not. It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Katherine agreed, "but it's also our best chance to end this." "By sacrificing yourself," William demanded. "No, we'll find another way." Katherine met his gaze steadily. "There is no other way. Richard won't stop until one of us is dead. You know that." The FBI team quickly developed a plan. Katherine would appear to comply with Richard's demand, but with a tactical team hidden nearby, ready to intervene. William would coordinate from the command center, providing real-time intel through Katherine's concealed earpiece. "I don't like this," William said as Katherine prepared to enter the museum. "There are too many variables, too many things that could go wrong." Katherine touched his face gently. "I've spent 3 years running from Richard. It's time I faced him." William caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. Just promise me you will be careful. I've only just found you. I'm not ready to lose you. You won't lose me, Katherine assured him, though they both knew it wasn't a promise she could guarantee. The Metropolitan Museum's rooftop garden was eerily beautiful at night, the city lights creating a glittering backdrop for the sculptures displayed there. Katherine moved cautiously through the space, aware of the FBI agents concealed among the exhibits below, ready to move on her signal. I'm in position, she whispered into her concealed microphone. No sign of Richard yet. Stay alert, William's voice replied in her ear. He could be anywhere. As if on cue, Richard emerged from behind a large sculpture, immaculately dressed in a tuxedo, as if he were simply another gala attendee. He carried a champagne flute in one hand, and Katherine had no doubt that his other hand held a weapon. Katherine, he greeted her smoothly, you're looking well for a dead woman. It's over, Richard, she replied, keeping her voice steady. The FBI has the evidence. Your accounts are frozen. Your network is being dismantled as we speak. Richard sipped his champagne, seemingly unconcerned. Perhaps, but empires can be rebuilt. The question is whether you'll be around to see it. You won't escape this time, Katherine warned. The building is surrounded. Escape, Richard laughed. My dear, I stopped planning for escape the moment I realized how thoroughly you and your new boyfriend had compromised my operation. No, tonight isn't about escape. It's about consequences. He set down his glass and pulled out a small device from his pocket, a detonator. I've wired the main support columns. One push, and the entire East Wing collapses. Hundreds dead, including most of New York's elite. A fitting end to the Donovan legacy, don't you think? Katherine felt her blood run cold. You're bluffing. The security checks would have found explosives. Would they? Richard smiled. When the head of museum security has been on my payroll for years, when the explosives were installed during the last renovation disguised as structural reinforcements, in her ear, Katherine could hear William frantically ordering the evacuation accelerated bomb squad teams dispatched. But there wasn't enough time. What do you want, Richard? She asked, playing for time. What I've always wanted, he replied. Control, but since that's no longer an option, I'll settle for ensuring no one else gets to win either. He raised the detonator. Especially not you, Katherine. You should have stayed dead. As his thumb moved toward the button, Katherine lunged forward. They crashed together, fighting for control of the detonator. Richard was stronger, but Katherine had spent 2 years surviving on instinct and determination. They struggled across the rooftop garden, knocking over sculptures and displays. Katherine managed to strike Richard's wrist against a stone bench, loosening his grip on the detonator. It skittered across the rooftop, coming to rest near the edge. Richard threw Katherine aside and scrambled for the device. She tackled him from behind, both of them, sliding perilously close to the roof's edge. You've ruined everything, Richard snarled, his composed facade finally cracking to reveal the rage beneath. Everything I built. You built it on lies and betrayal, Katherine shot back, struggling to keep him from the detonator. On my stolen life, FBI agents were rushing onto the rooftop now, weapons drawn. Richard saw them and made a desperate lunge for the detonator. Katherine grabbed his legs, holding him back. In their struggle, the detonator was kicked, sliding even closer to the edge. Richard broke free of Katherine's grip and dove for it, catching it just before it fell, but the momentum carried him over the edge of the roof. Katherine screamed, lunging forward. Her hand caught Richard's sleeve as he dangled 6 stories above the street, the detonator clutched in his other hand. Let me go, Richard snarled, or I take everyone with me. Give me the detonator, Katherine pleaded. It's over, Richard. Don't add mass murder to your crimes. For a moment, something almost human flickered in Richard's eyes, regret perhaps, or simply the recognition of defeat. Then it hardened into cold resolve. You win this round, Katherine, he said quietly. But remember, some victories come with costs too great to bear. Before she could react, Richard pressed the detonator button and released his grip on her hand. Katherine screamed as he fell, disappearing into the darkness below. FBI agents pulled her back from the edge as others radioed frantically for the bomb squad. Seconds ticked by in agonizing slowness as everyone waited for the explosion. But it never came. The bombs were a bluff, the FBI team leader finally announced. We've checked the locations he indicated. Nothing. Katherine sank to her knees, overcome with relief and delayed shock. It was over. Richard was gone, his final threat nothing but empty words. William burst onto the rooftop, rushing to her side. "Katherine, are you all right?" She nodded, unable to speak as the adrenaline drained from her system. William gathered her in his arms, holding her tightly. "It's finished," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now, truly safe." In the days that followed, the full extent of Richard's criminal empire was revealed to the public. Federal prosecutors worked with the evidence Katherine and William had gathered, dismantling the network piece by piece. Thomas Reynolds, contrary to Richard's claim, was very much alive and cooperating with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. Rebecca recovered from her gunshot wound and, true to her word, signed over the Hartwell family assets to Katherine. But rather than simply reclaiming her old life, Katherine had different plans. 1 year after Richard Donovan's death, Katherine stood in the grand ballroom of the Stellaris Hotel, watching the crowd of New York's elite mingle beneath crystal chandeliers that once cast shadows over her as she served drinks to the wealthy and powerful. The Hartwell Foundation's first annual gala was a triumph, with over 300 guests and more than $10 million raised to help victims of financial fraud reclaim their lives. She wore an elegant emerald gown that complemented her eyes, the fabric worth more than she'd earned in a month as a waitress. Her auburn hair was swept up in a sophisticated style that would have been unimaginable during her days serving in this very establishment. On her wrist gleamed a vintage Cartier watch, a gift from William on their 6-month anniversary. Katherine's fingers traced the delicate timepiece, remembering William's words when he'd presented it to her. "Time is the one thing no amount of money can buy back. Let's make every moment count." Coming from a man who measured success in billion-dollar deals for most of his life, the sentiment revealed how profoundly he had changed. "Quite a different view from this side of the room," said a familiar voice. Katherine turned to see Davidson, the former restaurant manager now employed as the Stellaris' hospitality director. The promotion had come shortly after William had purchased a controlling interest in the hotel chain, though Davidson didn't know that particular detail. He gave her a respectful nod. "Sometimes I still expect someone to hand me a tray of champagne flutes," Katherine replied with a smile. "Old habits." "Well, tonight you're the star of the show, dear Dr. Hartwell. Everyone's talking about what you've accomplished with the foundation." Katherine glanced around the room, spotting Rebecca deep in conversation with a group of European banking officials. Her cousin had proven invaluable over the past year, using her connections to establish the foundation's European operations. The transformation in Rebecca was remarkable. Gone was the uncertain woman consumed by guilt. In her place stood a confident executive who had found purpose in making amends. "It's been a team effort," Katherine said. "Speaking of which, have you seen William? Mr. Blackwood is greeting the FBI director at the entrance. Something about a new initiative they're announcing tonight." Katherine thanked him and made her way through the crowd, stopping occasionally to accept congratulations and exchange pleasantries. It still felt surreal sometimes, this restoration of her former life, albeit in a new and more meaningful form. She caught snippets of conversation as she passed. "They've recovered over $100 million for victims already. Heard they brought down the Petrovich syndicate in Brussels last month. The Justice Department is using their methods as a template." The Hartwell Foundation had quickly established itself as a formidable force in the fight against financial fraud. In just 12 months, they'd helped 27 victims recover stolen assets, provided legal assistance to hundreds more, and worked with law enforcement to prosecute 17 cases of major financial crimes. Near the bar, Katherine spotted a familiar face that caused her to pause. Senator James Morrison, chairman of the Banking Committee, was engaged in animated conversation with Michael Blackwood. The senator had been a close ally of the Donovan family for decades and had publicly denounced Katherine during her embezzlement scandal. Now he was laughing at something Michael had said, acting as if he'd never called for Katherine's imprisonment on national television. Such was the nature of power and wealth in America. Once you had them, the past could be conveniently rewritten or forgotten entirely. Katherine didn't begrudge the senator his hypocrisy. It was simply another reminder of how fortunate she had been to find William someone who valued truth over convenience. She spotted William near the entrance, deep in conversation with FBI Director Lawrence and his wife. At 53, William Blackwood remained an imposing figure, his silver temples and impeccable tailoring giving him the distinguished air of a man at the height of his powers. The subtle changes in his appearance over the past year, a slightly more relaxed posture, laugh lines deepening around his eyes, reflected the internal transformation she had witnessed. Yet Katherine knew the more significant changes that had occurred beneath that polished exterior. William had softened in ways that only those closest to him could see. His relationship with his son Michael had begun to heal. His approach to business had shifted to emphasize ethics over profit, and he discovered a capacity for tenderness that continued to surprise them both. He caught her eye across the room and excused himself from his conversation, making his way toward her with the confident stride that had first captured her attention. Even now, after a year together, the sight of him moving through a crowd still made her heart beat faster. There was something timeless about his presence, a quality that commanded respect without demanding it. "You look stunning," he said, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. "The most beautiful woman in the room by far." "Flatterer," Katherine replied, but the warmth in her eyes betrayed her pleasure at the compliment. "Not flattery when it's the simple truth." William's gaze traveled the room. "We've got the governor, 2 senators, the FBI director, and the heads of 3 major financial institutions. I'd say our little foundation has arrived. It's remarkable how quickly people forget you were once considered a criminal when you have $50 million and powerful friends," Katherine observed dryly. "Cynical, but accurate." William squeezed her hand. "I just finished speaking with Director Lawrence. The Bureau is officially endorsing our new training program. They're sending 20 agents to the first session." "That's wonderful news," Katherine said, genuinely excited. The program had been her brainchild, 6 months in development, designed to teach financial crime investigators the same techniques that had helped bring down Richard's network. "Are you ready for your speech?" William asked. "It's almost time." Katherine took a deep breath. Public speaking had never frightened her, but tonight's announcement would change everything. "I'm ready," she assured him. "Is Michael here yet?" "Just arrived. He's with Rebecca at the bar getting to know each other." William glanced toward his son, a mix of pride and lingering sadness in his expression. Their reconciliation was still a work in progress, but each meeting brought them closer. At 29, Michael Blackwood had his father's height and commanding presence, but softer features that must have come from his mother. He'd initially been wary of Katherine, suspicious of her sudden appearance in his father's life. But over the past year, they'd developed a tentative friendship built on shared interests and mutual respect. "He looks more like you every time I see him," Katherine commented. William's smile was bittersweet. "Let's hope he keeps his mother's temperament. One Blackwood bullhead in the family is quite enough." The lights dimmed slightly, signaling it was time for the program to begin. William escorted Katherine to the small stage at the front of the ballroom. As she took her place at the podium, looking out over the sea of expectant faces, Katherine felt a profound sense of vindication. 3 years ago, these same people had read about her disgrace in the financial pages, accepted Richard's narrative without question. Now they were gathered to support her mission. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and confident, "welcome to the first annual Hartwell Foundation Gala. Many of you knew me before as the heir to Hartwell Industries. Others may have read about me during what the press delicately called my legal troubles 3 years ago." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. "And a few of you," her gaze lingered briefly on the staff serving drinks along the edges of the room, "may remember me as Claire, who served your dinners right here at the Stellaris." She paused, letting the revelation sink in. Several guests exchanged surprised glances, reassessing the woman before them. "My journey from boardroom to back of house and back again has taught me something invaluable about justice in America. It exists, but it requires resources, determination, and often powerful allies." Katherine gestured to William, who stood at the side of the stage. "Without the belief and support of William Blackwood, I might still be hiding under a false identity, robbed of my name and reputation. Not everyone is so fortunate. That's why the Hartwell Foundation exists, not just to help the wealthy reclaim their fortunes, but to ensure that justice is accessible to anyone who has been victimized by financial fraud." She took a moment to look around the room, making eye contact with key supporters. "In our first year, we've recovered over $150 million for victims, provided legal assistance to nearly 300 individuals and families, and helped bring 17 perpetrators to justice." Applause broke out, genuine and enthusiastic. "But tonight, I'm excited to announce the next phase of our work. With the support of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, we're establishing the Hartwell Institute for Financial Justice, a research and training center dedicated to preventing fraud before it occurs." More applause, louder this time. "The Institute will train law enforcement, financial professionals, and corporate security teams to identify and stop financial crimes before victims lose everything. Because the best form of justice isn't recovery, it's prevention. As Katherine continued outlining the foundation's ambitious plans, William watched her with undisguised admiration. This was the woman he had fallen in love with, brilliant, determined, compassionate. The past year had only deepened his respect for her resilience and vision. "We'll be breaking ground next month on our campus in Connecticut," Katherine continued, "on land generously donated by Blackwood Enterprises. The institute will house state-of-the-art forensic laboratories, training facilities, and a resource center for victims." She paused, her expression growing more solemn. "I'd like to conclude by sharing a story about why this work matters so deeply to me. During my time in hiding, I met a woman named Maria Sandoval, a former bank teller who lost everything to a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. Unlike me, Maria had no wealthy grandmother to help her escape, no powerful ally to champion her cause. She ended up living in her car, separated from her children, her reputation destroyed." Katherine's voice remained steady, but those who knew her well could hear the emotion behind her words. "Maria died before she could see justice done. Her case was simply too small, her voice too quiet to be heard over the machinery of financial power. The Hartwell Institute is being built for the Mariahs of this world, people who deserve the same chance at justice that I received." When she finished her speech to enthusiastic applause, William joined her on stage for the ceremonial cutting of the ribbon to symbolically launch the new institute. Together, they represented a powerful partnership, personal and professional, that had already changed the landscape of financial justice in America. Later that evening, as the gala wound down and the last guest prepared to leave, William found Katherine on the terrace overlooking the city lights. She seemed lost in thought, a champagne flute dangling from her fingers. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I was thinking about my grandmother," Katherine replied softly. "She believed in me when no one else did. Used her entire life savings to help me escape. She died while I was in hiding, and I couldn't even attend her funeral." William placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "She would be incredibly proud of what you've built." "I hope so." Katherine turned to face him. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That I'm free, that Richard's network is dismantled, that I've found you." "Believe it," William said firmly. "You've earned this happy ending. They're in. Through intelligence, courage, and sheer determination." Katherine smiled, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "Is it really an ending, though? The Donovan family is still powerful. Thomas is serving a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. Richard's accomplices in Europe are largely untouched." "Not an ending, then," William conceded. "A new chapter." He took her empty champagne glass and set it aside, then reached into his pocket. Katherine's breath caught as she recognized the gesture. "William, I had a whole speech prepared," he said, his voice suddenly husky with emotion, "about timing and fate and second chances. But standing here now, looking at you in this place where we first met, I find I only need to say one thing." He dropped to one knee, producing a small velvet box. Inside was a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds in a vintage platinum setting. "Katherine Hartwell, will you marry me?" For a moment, Katherine couldn't speak. The journey from that first night when she'd slipped him a warning note to this proposal seemed impossible, a fairy tale in a world that rarely provided happy endings. "Yes," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, William." He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that weren't quite steady, then rose to kiss her. Around them, the New York skyline sparkled like the stars that had guided sailors home for centuries, a fitting backdrop for two people who had finally found safe harbor in each other. 3 months later, William stood at the altar in Trinity Church watching Katherine walk down the aisle on Michael's arm. His son had surprised them both by offering to give Katherine away, a gesture of acceptance that meant more than any words could express. Katherine was radiant in a classic ivory gown, her auburn hair crowned with a simple tiara that had belonged to her grandmother. As she joined William at the altar, her smile was luminous, private meant only for him, despite the 300 guests witnessing their union. The ceremony was traditional with vows they had written themselves. When it was William's turn to speak, he took both her hands in his voice strong and clear. "Katherine, 3 years ago, you warned me about danger with a simple note. Today, I promise to spend the rest of my life protecting you from any threat, supporting your dreams, and proving every day that you were worth every risk I ever took. I love you beyond measure, and I'm honored to call you my wife." Catherine's eyes shone with unshed tears as she replied, "William, you saw past my disguise to the woman I really was, even when I'd forgotten her myself. You gave me back my name, my purpose, and most importantly, my faith and love. I promise to stand with you through every challenge, to build something beautiful with you, and to love you with the same fierce determination you showed when you decided to save me. You are my hero, my partner, and my heart." When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, William's kiss was tender and full of promise. As they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, the church erupted in celebration. 5 years later, William and Catherine welcomed twins, a boy named James after Catherine's father, and a girl named Eleanor after her grandmother. The Blackwood estate, once a showcase rather than a home filled with the laughter and energy only children can bring. The Hartwell Foundation continued to grow under their joint leadership, expanding to offices in London, Geneva, and Singapore. The Institute for Financial Justice became the premier training facility for financial crime investigators worldwide, changing the landscape of economic justice forever. And on the twins' first birthday, as Catherine watched William teaching their son how to play chess with the set that had once belonged to his father, she realized that the greatest victory wasn't just reclaiming what was stolen, it was building something entirely new from the pieces. Their stolen kingdom had not just been restored, it had been transformed into something far more valuable than either of them had ever imagined possible.